I have talked often on this channel about a widespread sense of democratic decline, particularly in the West, but also in the world generally. A report published this week puts some flesh on the bones of that sense, noting two things of interest. One is that, yes, the global state of democracy is not in good shape. Many more countries are autocratizing than there are democratizing, and that is a big change in the last 20 years. And two is that if the Trump administration continues in the same direction and at the same pace as it's doing for the rest of its term, the US will distinguish itself by falling out of the list of democracies by the next report, and it will be at the top of the list for the fastest rate of autocratization. On the plus side, there's a couple of ifs in that sentence, so it could also be that that will not be the story at all. The report is produced from 31 million data points for 202 countries, compiled by 4,200 scholars and others, measuring for 600 different attributes of democracy, which certainly puts my 12-point sliding scale measures for fascism into perspective. I did say that it was a huge simplification. Does that mean that this report must be right on every detail? Well, no, of course not, but it gives some broad brush information that is at least based on measured parameters rather than tribal loyalties and wishful thinking. And that can be useful in terms of understanding at least our direction of travel, which should lead us to ask hard questions about why those things are happening. So, dealing with the first of those 2 points first, across the world, the report identifies that 19 countries are democratizing, becoming more democratic. In 2004, the number was 26. However, the number of countries becoming more autocratic is higher at 45, up massively from 12. That is a big shift. I would hazard to suggest well beyond the margin of error. That being the case, it's not a huge surprise where some of the other measures end up. More countries see freedom of expression deteriorating, 44 versus just 7 20 years ago. More countries see the quality of elections deteriorating, 25 versus 10. And on the flip side, fewer countries seeing freedom of expression improving, 8 versus 29, and the same for quality of elections improving, 10 versus 30. This report has seen the number of autocracies outnumber democracies for the first time, 91 versus 88. Nearly 3/4 of human beings alive on the planet today live in an autocracy, a country where one person has relatively unconstrained power. The report ranks democracy on a scale. Liberal democracies at the top, where you have functioning and fair electoral democracies, judicial and legislative constraints on the executive that are effective, along with the protection of civil liberties and equality before the law. Below that is an electoral democracy, still with free and fair multi-party elections, universal suffrage, freedom of expression and freedom of association. But you'll note that dropped from that list is those constraints on the executive. Then there's a grey zone, where you get a contrasting mix of signals. Below that, you get the electoral autocracy. Elections exist, but restrictions on freedom of expression and freedom of association make those elections less than free and fair. And then closed autocracies. No elections, an absence of freedom of expression, freedom of association, and all the abuses of power and corruption that become possible in that situation. So that's the basic headline for this year's report, the data for which went up to the end of last year. But the report comes with a big note, saying that while the Trump administration has only been in power for a couple of months, starting after the end of that last period, right now it is breaking records for how fast it is leading the charge towards autocratization. Right now, the US is still ranked as a liberal democracy, the highest rung. But actions since then that the report authors pointed to, including Trump pardoning 1,500 rioters who supported him, firing independent agency watchdogs without due process, purging the leadership of the apolitical police and military, ignoring laws that would constrain his actions, and unilaterally deleting federal programs and organizations created by the US Congress. In the past few days since this report was published, further milestones have arguably been passed, announcing that the pardons of his predecessor were null and void, for instance, invoking a war measure in spite of the absence of a war to deport people who are alleged to be gang members, without any due process to show whether those allegations are actually true or not. Not only that, doing so in defiance of a court order that directly instructed that flights were to be turned around that were in mid-air at the time. In that case, the administration felt that at least it needed to offer up some transparently bullshit justification as to why it didn't comply, a real "the dog ate my homework" level of excuse. But Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, was pretty frank in a later TV interview with Fox News.
We're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming.
But threats being discussed now in public by those close to the administration that judges who rule against Trump's orders should be impeached. This is the setting of the stage for testing out whether any of those checks on executive power are going to hold up under challenge. The Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts clearly understands the stakes that are being laid out here. He made a public statement saying that this would be an improper use of impeachment and that judicial disagreements should go through the established appeals process, as it has done for many, many decades. Issues of freedom of expression are also coming into question. One visiting French scientist was turned away from entering the country to attend a conference. Why? Because officials searched his mobile phone and found messages between himself and colleagues criticising Donald Trump. Think about that. Now, these could be isolated examples of people where the details and the justifications were kind of questionable, but they end up remaining the exceptions rather than the rule. Or they could be just the first indicators of a direction of travel that has a long way yet to go. Staffan Lindberg, head of the Varieties of Democracy project run out of Sweden's University of Gothenburg, responsible for this report, said that Trump is doing many of the things that Recep Erdogan has been doing in Turkey, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and Narendra Modi in India, but a lot faster. It's the pace. He's trying to do in a few months what it took them 8 to 10 years to achieve. Lindberg said the key now will be what the courts do in response and how the Trump administration will react to the judgments when they go against what they want to do. In countries that arrested the slide into autocracy, such as Poland and Brazil, North Macedonia and Zambia, the role of the courts was absolutely key. If things go badly in the US, it could end up classified as an electoral autocracy. According to Michael Miller, professor at George Washington University, in such a country, yes, you can protest, you can criticise the government, but there will be consequences, such as possible retaliation, losing your job or public funding or a contract. Over time, the majority of people and institutions, including powerful media owners, start to self-censor. That dynamic won't have been improved by the speech that Trump made at the Department of Justice, where he gave the appearance of lobbying for certain political adversaries to be pursued and prosecuted, referring to such adversaries as, quote, scum. He included the mainstream media, referring 4 times to CNN and MSNBC as illegal, saying that their behaviour should be stopped. This, said Miller, was stunning and remarkable, and all the more so for the subdued reaction to the speech by the media. And he said this: it would have been one of the biggest stories in the last 100 years. But it's Trump. Internal critics, people within his own party, have been threatened with Elon Musk pushing large amounts of money into getting them ousted in future primaries. Trump has targeted private law firms who happen to act on behalf of his political opponents, as is entirely right and proper for them to do so, penalising them and seeking to damage their businesses with the full weight of the law. Historian Ruth Ben-Ghiat told the New York Times, "The ultimate beneficiary of the acts that we're seeing happen, whether it's with the judiciary or other agencies, is Trump himself, because it's an expansion of his personal power." Right now, it seems that half the people are convinced that this is all going to end very badly indeed. The other half is hoping that so long as when they look out the window things continue to look sort of normal, then people will pull back from unreasonable positions and it will all be okay. Either of them could be right, but it would be very much a normal reaction right now to be alert and to keenly watch how the direction of travel goes from this point onwards.